The envelope arrived on a quiet afternoon, resting on the edge of the small wooden table I used as both a desk and a dining space. It didn't belong there. Everything about it felt out of place, too elegant, too intentional, too heavy. Gold-lining thick paper, my name written in careful, familiar handwriting. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Still, my fingers hesitated as I picked it up. It had been months since I last spoke to my father. Months of silence that felt both peaceful and suffocating at the same time. Cutting him off hadn't been a dramatic decision. It wasn't one explosive fight or a single unforgivable moment. It was years of small cuts, words that lingered longer than they should, looks that said more than insults ever could. You're not good enough. You'll never amount to anything. You're a disgrace. He had said it so often that, for a long time, I believed him. I turned the envelope over slowly, tracing the edges like it might disappear if I handled it too roughly. But what made my chest tighten wasn't fear. It was her, my sister. She was the only reason I hadn't completely burned that bridge to ashes. I finally opened the envelope, sliding the card out carefully. A soft floral scent followed, faint but unmistakable, something she always loved. The invitation was beautiful. Her name stood at the top, glowing in elegant script, paired with someone else's, the man she had chosen to spend her life with. I smiled without realizing it. She deserved that happiness more than anyone I knew, but as my eyes moved down the card, I saw it. The venue, the date, and then hosted by my father's name. That small line felt heavier than everything else combined. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a test, a quiet, unspoken question. Would I come back into that house of judgment, even for her? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as memories began creeping in, uninvited. Growing up in that house had always felt like living under a microscope. Every mistake magnified, every success dismissed. I wasn't the child he wanted. I learned that early. My sister, though she was everything right in his world, smart, graceful, perfect, and I didn't resent her for it. I never could, because she was also the only one who ever stood between me and his words. I remembered nights when she would sit beside me after one of his lectures, quietly placing a cup of tea in my hands. He doesn't mean it, she would say, but we both knew that wasn't true. He always meant it. And yet, despite everything, she never let me feel completely alone. That's why this invitation mattered, not because of the wedding, not because of him, but because it was hers. I looked down at the card again, my grip tightening slightly. Could I really go back there? Back to the same people who had watched me shrink over the years and said nothing? Back to him standing tall, proud, as if he had never broken anything behind closed doors. The thought made my stomach twist. I stood up and walked toward the small window in my apartment. Outside, life moved on as usual, cars passing, people laughing, the world untouched by the weight sitting in my chest. For a moment, I considered not going. It would be easier. No confrontation, no memories, no risk of reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. But then I imagined her standing there, looking out into the crowd, looking for me, and not finding me. That thought hurt more than anything my father had ever said. I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes. For you. I whispered under my breath, as if she could somehow hear me. The decision settled in quietly after that. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. I would go, not as the person my father thought I was. Not as the disgrace he had labeled me, but as myself. For the first time, I wouldn't go there seeking approval. I wouldn't go there hoping things would be different. I would go there only for her. I placed the invitation back on the table, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. Still complicated, still painful, but no longer something I wanted to run from. Because sometimes the hardest places to return to are the ones that remind you exactly who you've become. And maybe, just maybe, this time, I wouldn't walk in as the person who used to stay silent. This time, I would simply stand. The wedding hall shimmered with a kind of perfection that felt almost unreal. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above, casting warm light over rows of white chairs wrapped in satin. The air smelled of fresh roses and polished marble, and a quiet melody from a live string quartet drifted through the space, elegant and controlled, like everything else about the evening. I stood near the entrance for a moment longer than necessary, adjusting my sleeves, steadying my breath. It had been years since I'd stepped into a place where I felt this small. Hey, her voice broke through the noise in my head. I turned and there she was, my sister, dressed in white, radiant in a way that made the entire room feel secondary. Her smile was immediate, genuine, and when she walked toward me, it felt like nothing else mattered. "You came," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Of course I did," I replied, forcing a small smile. "I told you I'd be here." She hugged me tightly, longer than people usually do at weddings. Not the quick, polite embrace meant for photographs, but something real. Something grounding. "I missed you," she whispered. "I'm right here," I said, but even as I said it, I knew the truth. I wasn't fully here yet, not while he was in the same room. I felt his presence before I saw him. Some things don't change. Across the hall, surrounded by guests, stood my father, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, shaking hands and smiling like a man who had never raised his voice in anger. Like a man who had nothing to regret. Our eyes met for a brief second. No smile, no acknowledgement. Just a glance that felt like a reminder. "You don't belong here." I looked away first. It was easier that way. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows were exchanged, applause filled the air, and for a short while, everything felt peaceful. I focused on her happiness. On the way, her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. On the tears she tried to hide when she smiled. That was enough, that had to be enough. But peace doesn't last long in places built on unspoken tension. The reception began with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. People moved freely, conversations overlapped, and for a moment, I managed to blend into the background, just another guest among many. Until the speeches started. I should have left then. Something in my chest tightened the moment I saw him stand up, adjusting his suit jacket, a glass of champagne in his hand. The room quieted almost instantly. He had always known how to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Thank you all for being here on this special day." Polite smiles, nods, soft applause. He turned toward my sister, his expression softening just enough to seem sincere. "My daughter," he said, "has always been a source of pride for me." I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. Here it comes, she's everything a father could hope for: intelligent, graceful, successful. More applause. I glanced at her, she smiled, but there was something behind it, something uncertain. And as parents, he continued, pacing slightly, we dream that all our children will follow the same path. A pause, the air shifted, but, he added with a light chuckle, life doesn't always give us that luxury. A few guests laughed hesitantly, unsure of where this was going. I knew exactly where. I felt it before he even said the words. "I was fortunate," he said, raising his glass slightly, "to have at least one child who brought honor to this family." The word "one" echoed louder than anything else. My hands curled into fists under the table, and then, he continued, shrugging casually, "There are lessons." A ripple of awkward laughter spread again. People were starting to notice now, starting to understand. "I suppose every family has someone who doesn't quite live up to expectations," he said, his tone still calm, almost amused. "Someone who reminds you that not all efforts pay off." This time no one laughed, the silence was heavier. And then he looked directly at me, not for long, just enough for everyone else to follow his gaze. I felt it, the shift in the room, eyes turning, whispers forming, judgment settling. A lifetime of quiet humiliation condensed into one single moment. "A disappointment," he finished softly, taking a sip from his glass, as if he had just made a harmless joke. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to hurt. I pushed my chair back slowly, the sound barely noticeable against the suffocating silence. My legs felt heavier than they should, but I stood anyway. No anger, no words. That's how it had always been. I walked away, step by step, ignoring the stares, ignoring the weight of everything pressing down on me. Because staying would mean breaking, and I had spent too many years learning how not to. The exit wasn't far. Just a few more steps, just a few more seconds, and I could leave all of this behind. Stop. Her voice. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. I froze, the room did too, and slowly I turned around. For a moment everything stood still. The soft music had faded into silence, conversations cut mid-sentence, and even the clinking of glasses had stopped. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, and in the center of it all she stood, my sister, still in her wedding dress, the delicate fabric catching the light, but there was nothing fragile about her now. Her posture was firm, her chin slightly raised, and in her hand was the microphone my father had just used. The same microphone that had turned me into a joke, now it belonged to her. "Dad," she said, her voice steady but edged with something deeper, "I think you forgot something." A murmur rippled through the guests, quiet but unmistakable. My father frowned slightly, caught off guard. He wasn't used to being interrupted, especially not like this, especially not in front of an audience. "This isn't the time," he started. "No," she cut in, her tone calm but unyielding. "This is exactly the time." I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to smile, sit down, and let the moment pass, like everyone always did. But she didn't. She took a step forward instead. "You stood there and talked about pride," she continued, her eyes locked on him, "about expectations, about disappointment." The last word lingered in the air. "And somehow," she added, "you thought that was appropriate for today." No one moved. No one spoke. The silence had changed now. It wasn't passive anymore. It was watching, listening, waiting. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the room before finding me, and when it did, something shifted inside my chest. "You all see me standing here today," she said, addressing the guests, her voice softening just a little. "Dressed like this, smiling, celebrating, and you think you know my story." A pause, but you don't. I swallowed hard, my hands still clenched at my sides. "You don't know what it took for me to get here," she continued. "You don't know the nights I thought I wouldn't make it, the times I almost gave up." Her grip tightened slightly on the microphone. "And you definitely don't know who made sure I didn't." The room leaned in, almost instinctively. Because it wasn't the person who just gave that speech? A sharp, collective intake of breath echoed faintly. My father's expression hardened, but for once, he said nothing. She took another step forward. "Do you know who paid my college application fees when we couldn't afford them?" she asked, her voice stronger now. Silence answered her, not him. Her eyes didn't leave mine. "Do you know who stayed up with me every single night before my exams, who made sure I ate when I was too stressed to even think about it, who told me I was capable when I didn't believe it myself?" My throat tightened. It wasn't him either. The weight of her words pressed against every corner of the room. It was my sibling, the way she said it. Clear, unapologetic, proud felt louder than anything my father had said minutes ago. And for the first time that night, I couldn't look away. "While you were calling them a disgrace," she said, turning back toward him briefly. "They were the one holding this family together in ways you never even noticed." My vision blurred slightly. I blinked, but the tears didn't fall, not yet. "They gave up opportunities so I could have mine," she continued. "They carried burdens that were never theirs to carry, and they did it quietly without asking for recognition." Her voice softened again, but it didn't lose its strength. "Without asking for love," that hit harder than anything else because it was true, every word of it. She looked back at me, and this time her expression changed. It wasn't just determination anymore. It was something warmer, something that reached all the way through the years of silence and self-doubt. "You call them a disappointment," she said gently, "but if I am anything you're proud of today," a small tear slipped down her cheek. "It's because of them." The room had completely shifted now, no more whispers, no more judgment, just attention, real, focused attention. People weren't looking at me the same way anymore. They were seeing something else, something my father had never allowed them to see. "They are the reason I'm standing here," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "The reason I didn't fall apart, the reason I believed I could have a future." I felt something inside me breaking, but not in the way it used to. This wasn't pain. This was release. "For years," she continued, "they were made to feel like they weren't enough." Her grip on the microphone steadied again. "But I'm standing here today to say what should have been said a long time ago." She lifted her chin, her eyes never leaving mine. "You are enough," the words echoed, loud, clear, unavoidable, "and I am proud of you. This time I couldn't stop the tears. They came quietly, but they came, because in a single moment, in front of everyone who had ever doubted me, someone had chosen to speak the truth. And not just anyone, her, my sister, the one person who had always seen me even when no one else did. Silence filled the hall, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one wasn't heavy with judgment. It was alive, shifting, changing, the kind of silence that comes right before something real settles in. I stood there, unmoving, my sister's words still echoing through me. You are enough, I am proud of you. For so many years, I had imagined hearing those words, but never like this, never in front of everyone. Never when I wasn't even asking for them. I wiped my face quickly, trying to steady myself, but something had already changed. The weight I had carried for so long, the quiet shame, the constant feeling of falling short, it wasn't gone completely, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. And for the first time, I realized something important. I didn't need my father's approval to stand tall. I already had everything he refused to give me. The room slowly came back to life, but differently now. Guests exchanged glances not awkward, but thoughtful. Some nodded slightly, as if pieces were falling into place. Others looked at my father, not with admiration anymore, but with something closer to discomfort. The image he had built so carefully was cracking. And he knew it. I looked at him, really looked this time. For years, he had seemed larger than life, untouchable, always in control, always right. But now standing there without words, without his usual authority, he looked smaller, not weak, just human. And maybe that was the real shift. Because the man who once defined my worth now stood, exposed not by anger, not by rebellion, but by truth. He cleared his throat, adjusting his grip on the glass in his hand, as if searching for something to say. Something to regain control, but nothing came. What could he say? That she was wrong, that everything she shared was a lie. He couldn't because deep down he knew. Every word she spoke was real, and for once, reality wasn't on his side. My sister lowered the microphone slowly, her gaze still steady. The room waited, almost expecting more, but she didn't need to say anything else. She had already done enough, more than enough. I took a slow breath and did something I hadn't planned to do. I walked back, not toward the exit, but toward her. Each step felt lighter than the last, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer held the same power over me. When I reached her, she didn't say anything. She just smiled, and that was enough. I pulled her into a hug, careful of her dress, but firm enough to say everything I couldn't put into words. Thank you, I whispered. She shook her head slightly against my shoulder. You don't have to thank me, she murmured. You deserved that a long time ago. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just needed someone brave enough to say it out loud. We pulled apart and I glanced around the room again. People weren't staring anymore. They were acknowledging. Some gave small, respectful nods. Others offered faint smiles, not out of pity, but something closer to understanding. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and that was all I needed. I turned once more toward my father. For a brief moment, our eyes met again. But this time it was different. There was no anger in me, no need to prove anything. No desperate hope for him to finally see me, because I understood something now that I hadn't before. His inability to value me was never a reflection of my worth. It was a limitation of his own, and I didn't have to carry that anymore. I gave a small, respectful nod, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just closure, then I looked away. The music slowly returned, soft at first, as if testing whether it was allowed to exist again. Conversations followed, gentle and cautious, before gradually returning to normal. But nothing was truly the same, not for me and not for him, because in a single moment the story he had told about me for years had been undone. Not with revenge, not with shouting, but with truth. And truth, I realized, is the quietest kind of victory. I stayed for the rest of the evening, not hidden in the background, not shrinking into corners, but present. Fully present, I laughed when I wanted to, spoke when spoken to, even danced once awkwardly when my sister insisted. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because someone gave me permission, but because I finally gave it to myself. As the night came to an end, I stepped outside for a moment, the cool air brushing against my face. The sky was calm, endless. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The past was still there. It always would be. But it didn't define me anymore, because tonight, in a room full of people, I wasn't the disgrace. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the person he said I was. I was something stronger, something quieter, something real, and as I walked away from that place, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally moving forward,